If you think the most dangerous challenge a man can throw at Mike Tyson is a fist, you don't understand how men like Tyson are really tested. The worst challenge is humiliation. Public humiliation. The kind that happens in front of fighters, trainers, promoters, and hard men who know exactly what it means when one man tries to reduce another in front of witnesses. And on that night, in a room built for combat and ego, one man made the mistake of looking straight at Mike Tyson and saying, "Stand in front of me for 30 seconds. He meant it like a joke. He meant it like a trap. What he didn't understand was that some men stop being part of the room the moment you say something like that to them. They become the room. It was not a major pay-per-view event. That would have made the moment easier, safer, more controlled. There would have been handlers, broadcasters, structure, too many eyes and too much money tied to order. This was worse. A private combat showcase. A high-end closed event where the crowd was small enough to matter and serious enough to understand exactly what it was seeing. The kind of night where trainers from different disciplines came to prove their methods, where fighters came half to learn and half to measure themselves against whatever else the world had built. The venue had once been a small theater, then a boxing hall, then something in between. Now it sat under dim amber lights and smelled of old canvas, stale smoke caught in fabric, cleaning solution, leather, and the metallic dryness of a place where enough men had bled to permanently change the air. The floor had been cleared except for a low platform at center, not a full ring, but enough of one to create separation and hierarchy, enough to let one man stand above another for a few crucial seconds. Folding chairs filled the rest of the room in tight rows, and every chair was taken. There were fighters from boxing gyms, kickboxing camps, karate schools, and a few men from no formal system at all, just hard men from hard places, with blunt faces and shoulders shaped by years of lifting, fighting, and carrying pain badly. Along the walls stood promoters pretending to be calm, local sports reporters pretending not to be hungry, and old trainers who judged everything without expression. Conversations were low. Nobody there needed help understanding violence. Mike Tyson was not advertised as the center of the night. That was the first important detail. He had not come to fight, not to speak, not to make an appearance as a spectacle. He was there because his name moved through circles like that, the way pressure moves through weather. Sometimes he showed up because somebody asked. Sometimes because somebody he respected was there. Sometimes because in that world, men gathered around danger the way other worlds gather around gossip. Tyson was seated off to the side, not hidden, but not presented either. A black jacket over a dark shirt, dark pants, heavy stillness. His body had that compact, coiled density that made him look smaller than heavyweights on paper and far more dangerous in person. He was sitting with two men nearby, neither speaking much. Tyson wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry either, not visibly. He looked like a man observing things from behind a locked door. The fighters who noticed him first reacted quietly, a chin lift, a murmur, a glance passed down a row. It spread the way real recognition always spreads in fight rooms, fast, discreet, and more serious than celebrity. Nobody there saw a movie star. They saw consequence. Then the challenger arrived. He was not an unknown. That made the night worse. If he had been a nobody, the room might have dismissed him as a fool before he ever opened his mouth. But he had credentials, not Tyson's kind, not boxing's kind, but enough to carry weight in his own world. He was tall, broad through the upper body, long-limbed in the way men are when their style depends on reach, speed, and public control. A fighter from another discipline, one of those men who had built a reputation not just by winning, but by turning every victory into theater. He understood crowds, understood pacing, understood that if you moved correctly, smiled at the right time, waited one beat longer than expected before speaking, the room would hand itself over. He entered already playing to them, not obnoxiously at first. He just knew how to take space. He laughed with the event host before the host had finished his joke. He touched gloves with men who were technically his peers, but acted as if he were doing them a favor. He walked toward the platform like the air belonged to him. Men like that become dangerous long before they become violent, because they mistake control of attention for control of reality. He wore his confidence the way other men wear jackets. By the time he stepped onto the platform, the room had turned toward him. He knew it, loved it, and became bigger inside it. He rolled his shoulders once, bounced lightly, then took the microphone somebody offered him without asking whether he was supposed to. That's another kind of power men in those rooms recognize immediately, the power to skip permission, because no one wants to be the first person to say no. He spoke easily at first, smiling, warming them up. A few comments about styles, about real toughness, about who freezes under pressure and who doesn't. The room answered him because he knew how to make them answer. He built heat carefully. Not enough to alarm anyone, just enough to make the room feel his hand on the wheel. Then he saw Tyson fully, not just noticed him, saw him. His eyes landed on Tyson's section and stayed there half a second too long. That was when the first men in the room felt it turn. The fighter on the platform smiled differently, sharper, more personal. Like a man spotting a ladder he had not expected but instantly wanted to climb. Tyson did not move. That silence encouraged him. He said Mike Tyson's name into the microphone. The room reacted immediately, some laughter, some whistles. A rush of attention moving in two directions at once, toward the platform, then across to Tyson, then back again. Tyson remained seated, elbow on the armrest, expression unchanged. But the men nearest him stopped acting casual. A trainer in the row behind leaned forward. One of Tyson's men shifted slightly in his chair. A few old fighters along the wall stopped pretending to look elsewhere. The challenger looked delighted with himself. He started talking about legends, about reputation, about what happens when fear grows larger than the man who first created it. At first, the crowd took it as talk, showmanship, the usual male ritual of saying something slightly reckless because the room feels warm and forgiving, and because confidence can be mistaken for permission. Then his tone changed. He pointed, not directly yet, but openly enough. He said some fighters are only dangerous when rules protect them. He said some names live longer than their reality. Tyson still did not move. That was the second mistake, because now the challenger mistook stillness for passivity. He laughed softly into the mic and said, "You know what I'd need from Mike Tyson?" The room quieted, not fully, but enough. Then he answered his own question. "Just stand in front of me for 30 seconds. The room reacted in layers. First came the immediate noise, laughter, surprise, someone near the back clapping once too hard because he thought he was in on the joke. Then came the second reaction, the more important one. Fighters looking not at the man with the mic, but at Tyson. That is always the real indicator in rooms like that. Crowds follow volume. Fighters follow danger. The challenger wasn't done. He spread his arms and smiled like he had already won something. "That's all," he said. 30 seconds. No excuses. No ring games. No old stories. Just stand there." A few people laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. Tyson sat completely still. The challenger leaned into the microphone. "That's too much for you, Mike." And from that moment on, every serious person in the room understood the same thing. This had stopped being entertainment. The moment he repeated it, the room turned. That was the strange part, not the line itself. Men in fight culture say reckless things all the time. They sell fights that shouldn't sell, challenge people they shouldn't challenge, and inflate themselves in front of crowds because half the industry runs on ego and noise. The real danger came when he said it again, and the room, instead of growing louder, began to narrow around him. 30 seconds, he repeated, pacing slowly across the platform. "That's all I'm asking. Mike Tyson just standing in front of me for 30 seconds. He pointed this time, directly. A finger aimed across witnesses carries more insult than a scream. Men in that world understand that instinctively. A point is accusation, public ranking, reduction. It says I have the right to define you from here. And when he pointed at Tyson, several of the older men in the room stopped smiling altogether. Tyson remained seated. He didn't smirk, didn't shake his head, didn't play the veteran, didn't play the celebrity, didn't wave it off as beneath him. He just sat there looking at the challenger in a way that felt less like patience and more like the last quiet seconds before weather breaks. One of Tyson's companions leaned in slightly and said something near his shoulder. Tyson didn't answer, or maybe he did too softly for anyone to hear. The companion leaned back, but kept his eyes on the platform. That tiny movement set off a dozen others around the room. Men straightened in their chairs. Trainers near the wall folded their arms and went silent. A promoter by the entryway lowered his drink without realizing he'd been holding it. Up on the platform, the challenger had not yet noticed the shift because he was listening only to himself. That's the trap with public performance. Once a man starts mistaking reaction for support, he can lose the ability to hear the room warning him to stop. He thought he had momentum. He thought Tyson's silence meant fear, caution, or dignity. He could not yet imagine that silence as its own form of threat. So he kept going. He talked about styles now, about what a boxer does when he can't rely on boxing, about what old champions look like when you remove their structure, about standing still under pressure, about men built for controlled violence versus men who only know how to rush. None of it was smart. Some of it wasn't even coherent. But it didn't need to be. He wasn't arguing. He was humiliating, or trying to. That kind of thing doesn't require logic, only volume and confidence. He crouched near the edge of the platform and looked toward Tyson as if confiding something to the room. "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "Maybe Mike knows he can't stand there with me when there's nowhere to hide." The room made another sound then, a mixture of disbelief and appetite, but it came and went quickly. Even the men laughing now were looking sideways, checking Tyson, checking each other, checking whether they were still inside something safe. Tyson moved one hand. That was all. His fingers slid off the armrest and rested against his thigh. It was such a small movement, most ordinary people would have missed it. The fighters didn't. One kickboxer in the third row stopped whispering mid-sentence. An old boxing trainer near the aisle exhaled through his nose and muttered, "There it is." He didn't mean a threat had happened. He meant the opposite. A decision had begun. The challenger stood again, fully upright, enjoying his own reflection in the room's tension. "Stand there," he said. 30 seconds, that's all. If you're really Mike Tyson, that should be easy." He laughed after saying it. Alone, this time. Nobody joined him fast enough. The laughter died before it finished leaving his mouth. He sensed the miss, but not its size. You could see him trying to recover with bravado, body still loose, shoulders still high, microphone gripped like a weapon that still worked. But now every word he said had to push against a silence he had not built and no longer controlled. He said Tyson's name again. That was his third mistake. Names matter in rooms full of men who understand status. Repeating another man's name after he has refused to answer you can look bold from one angle. From another, it looks like begging the moment to stay alive because you feel it slipping. The challenger was too deep inside his own performance to recognize that. Tyson looked up slowly, not dramatically, just enough. That single upward look did more than all the challenger's talking had done. There are men whose eyes change rooms, not because they're mythical, because everyone in the room has already heard too many stories, seen too much film, and quietly agreed that some men carry a different relationship to violence. Tyson was one of those men. The challenger felt that look. His grin held, but it changed shape. The corners tightened. The ease left it. For the first time all night, he looked like a man improvising rather than controlling. "Come on," he said again, now more to defend himself than to push Tyson. "Stand up. 30 seconds." Somewhere near the back, somebody whispered, "He's gone too far." The challenger heard none of it, or heard it and mistook it for fuel, because he took one step closer to the platform's edge, leaned in, and added the line that finished the room. "You can't even do that." At that, Tyson leaned forward, not standing yet, just forward. But the entire room changed. A chair creaked loudly somewhere. A woman in the second section covered her mouth without seeming to know she'd done it. One of the event organizers took a step toward the platform and then stopped, as if his body had started fixing the situation before his mind had decided how. The challenger saw all of this happen around him and still did not understand that the moment had already left his possession. Tyson planted both feet. The men nearest him saw it and knew. Everything after that was only waiting. When Tyson stood, the air went out of the room. That is the only accurate way to describe it. Not "the crowd got quiet," not "people gasped." Those things happened, but after. First came something more primitive, a shared involuntary collapse in the room's emotional pressure, like an entire building had just realized it had been playing with the wrong kind of electricity. Tyson rose without speed. That made it horrifying. If he had jumped up angrily, if he had shouted, if he had made the sort of noisy, explosive move crowds are trained to understand, the room might have processed it as temper. Temper is manageable. Temper is familiar. Men can tell themselves stories about temper. They can joke about it later. They can turn it into, "He almost lost it." This was different. Tyson stood the way a man stands when he has already made peace with what he is about to become, if the next few seconds require it. Calm, direct, no wasted motion. The challenger stopped smiling, only for an instant. But the room saw it, and once a room sees the first fracture in a performer's face, the performance is dead. Tyson didn't speak. He looked at the platform, at the man who had spent the last several minutes trying to summon him with words, and then he stepped into the aisle. That was when the room broke into motion, not panic, not yet. But men began making decisions. Security on the side wall straightened all at once, like a current had passed through them. One promoter in a light jacket moved toward the platform, already raising one hand in a placating gesture he knew would not matter if things truly turned. A trainer near Tyson stood too, not touching him, just moving into proximity, because some situations become more dangerous if a man feels physically isolated inside them. The challenger was still on the platform with the microphone in his hand. That microphone now looked absurd. 1 minute earlier, it had made him larger. Now it made him look exposed. There is a kind of humiliation that happens when a prop still sits in your hand after its power has vanished. He lowered it slightly, then brought it back up as if instinctively trying to reclaim the role it had given him. But roles don't survive direct contact with reality. Tyson kept walking, not fast, not theatrical, not looking left or right. He moved like a man crossing a distance already decided in his head. The room split around him. That's what happens around truly feared men, not fan behavior, something older. Bodies yield without wanting to admit they're yielding. Chairs scrape, knees pull inward, shoulders turn sideways. Men who would swear they aren't afraid find themselves making space anyway. The challenger took one step backward on the platform, tiny, automatic, irreversible. You could almost hear the room understand it. Up to that second, a part of everyone watching still wanted to believe the challenger might ride this out, laugh it off, flip the moment back in his favor with timing, charm, or one last perfect line. But that backward step destroyed the illusion. It told the truth too clearly. He had expected Tyson to remain an audience member. He had not expected him to rise as a man. Tyson reached the front edge of the seating area and stopped just below the platform. From there, the height difference worked against the challenger. It should have helped him. Standing above another man in front of witnesses usually grants a certain visual control. But Tyson made elevation irrelevant. He stood beneath him and looked up with such total stillness that the higher position began to feel like exposure instead of dominance. The challenger swallowed. Visible now. He tried to say something. Nothing came. Then, forcing it, he raised the microphone and said, "What, you gonna—" He stopped there. Because the second Tyson's eyes locked fully onto him at close range, the rest of the sentence died. There are moments when fear arrives not as panic, but as comprehension. The challenger was not yet terrified in the childish sense. He had not fallen apart. What hit him first was understanding. Understanding that this was no longer abstract, no longer promotional, no longer a line for other people to react to. He had pulled a real man into a real moment and now had no prepared language for what stood in front of him. Tyson still said nothing. A man behind Tyson murmured, "Mike." Tyson didn't turn. The challenger's free hand flexed once at his side. He looked down, then briefly toward the edge of the platform as though considering movement. Not escape exactly. Adjustment. Repositioning. The kind of thing men do when they need to convince themselves they still possess options. But the room read that too. And once a crowd senses the man with the microphone has started looking for exits, his authority is gone. Tyson took one final small step closer. The challenger flinched, not dramatically. His shoulders tightened. His stance shifted too high. His chin came back a fraction. A fighter's body tells the truth before his mouth ever does, and his body had just confessed what the rest of him desperately wanted to hide. He had not wanted a response like this. He had wanted Tyson's reputation, not Tyson. The microphone lowered again, this time all the way. And the room, seeing that, understood the challenge had already collapsed. What followed was more dangerous than the insult itself. Because once the challenger's confidence broke publicly, the entire room had to decide what kind of story it was now inside. Was it still a show, a near confrontation, a cautionary tale? Or had it become one bad breath away from a full physical incident between a legend and a fool on a raised platform in front of 200 witnesses? That uncertainty is what makes rooms panic. Two security men moved closer from opposite sides, not rushing, trying to maintain the illusion of control. One organizer climbed halfway up the platform steps and stopped, holding his hands out as though human palms could negotiate between pride and consequence. Another man in a dark suit went straight to the challenger's corner and started speaking fast, jaw tight, eyes never leaving Tyson for more than a second. Tyson still had not spoken. That silence was now doing the work of violence. The challenger tried once to recover his stance, but he was fighting the room itself now. Nothing is heavier than public reversal. A minute earlier, he had owned the sound, dictated the rhythm, chosen where people looked. Now every eye was on him for the opposite reason. They were watching to see whether he had enough dignity left to stop. He did not know how to stop cleanly. That is one of the cruel truths of performance-based confidence. Men who are good at escalation are rarely good at retreat. They know how to press, how to posture, how to feed attention. They do not know how to walk back across the bridge they burned without looking ridiculous. He lifted the mic halfway again, seemed to consider another line, then lowered it. Good. One of his own cornermen said something urgent at the edge of the platform, probably trying to save him by giving him a reason to disengage. The challenger nodded without hearing much. His eyes were still on Tyson. Tyson's eyes were still on him. And between them sat the full weight of everything stupid that had just been said aloud. A hand touched Tyson's arm from behind, not restraining, just there. He didn't shake it off, which was the first hopeful sign anyone had seen. An older trainer who knew Tyson's world well enough to understand how little room there is between stillness and explosion leaned in and said quietly, "Not for him." That was a smart sentence. Not calm down, not leave it, not don't. Just a reminder that some men are not worth crossing the final distance for. Tyson's chest rose once, fell. He looked at the challenger for another long second. Then he did something worse than shouting. He gave the man the chance to live inside what he'd done. Tyson stayed where he was, fully present, fully willing-looking, but he did not move higher. He did not climb. He did not close the final gap. That refusal turned the moment into a sentence rather than an explosion. It forced the challenger to remain conscious inside his own humiliation. And now, finally, the challenger understood. The original boast had sounded perfect in his head because he imagined Tyson as a name, a public figure, a distant icon who could be manipulated through spectacle. But standing above Tyson now, watching him say nothing and still take everything back, he learned the difference between challenging a story and challenging a man. That difference hollowed him out in real time. He took one slow step backward from the platform's edge. The room saw it. Then another. Not running, not collapsing, but retreating in the only way left available to him, silently, trying to convert survival into dignity. Tyson kept watching. That was enough to make the second backward step look honest. A wave of relief passed through the room so subtly it could only be felt by the men paying attention to their own bodies. Shoulders dropped, hands unclenched. One organizer let out a breath so sharp it sounded like he'd been punched himself. A cornerman on the far side sat down hard on a folding chair, as though his knees had only just informed him they were tired. The challenger no longer looked like the man who had started all this. Same body, same gear, same microphone hanging uselessly from one hand. But confidence is not clothing. Once it tears in public, no amount of posture can fully repair it. Tyson let the silence stretch another second. Then he said the only line he needed. "Don't call me again unless you mean it." Quiet, flat. No performance in it at all. That line hit harder than any scream would have, because it reframed the entire thing. It told the room the challenge had not failed because Tyson was emotional. It failed because the challenger had been unserious, because he had played with a reality he had no intention of inhabiting. The challenger said nothing back, couldn't. And in that silence, everybody present knew the moral order of the room had been reestablished completely. No official fight happened, no timer, no referee, no 30 seconds. But by the time Tyson turned away, nobody in that room still believed the challenger had gotten what he wanted. The platform, which had looked like a throne minutes earlier, now looked like a trap. The challenger remained on it because he had nowhere else to stand without making his defeat even more visible. His cornermen closed around him, not in triumph, not even in protection, but in repair. They were trying to give his body some geometry of confidence back, adjusting a glove, touching his shoulder, speaking too close to his ear. Men do that when they need to rebuild another man's outline before the room erases it entirely. Tyson stood below for one more second after delivering his line, eyes still hard, face still unreadable. Then he turned. That turn was devastating, because it denied the challenger everything else he might have hoped for. A continuing argument, an exchange of insults, some last dramatic collision that would let him claim he had really been in the same arena emotionally. Tyson refused all of that. By turning away when he did, he reduced the entire challenge to what it had always actually been, one loud man trying to borrow significance from another man's danger. And now that danger was leaving. The crowd did not explode into noise immediately. That would have cheapened it. Instead, the room came back to life in fragments. A whisper here, a chair move there, a strange nervous laugh from somewhere behind the third row that died almost instantly. Sound returned the way it does after lightning strikes nearby, not because anyone feels safe, but because silence has become too heavy to hold much longer. Tyson walked back through the aisle the same way he had come forward, slow, controlled, not once looking behind him. People moved for him without being told. That's another thing pride-driven men misunderstand about real intimidation. They think it's in shouting, in body language, in manufactured size. Real intimidation often looks like nothing more than a room rearranging itself around one man because everyone in it knows, consciously or not, that getting in his path would be a bad decision. By the time Tyson reached his seat area again, the challenger was still on the platform, still above everyone physically, still below them emotionally. That contrast would become the story people repeated, not the insult itself, not even Tyson's line, the image, a man with a microphone and a crowd behind him trying to look fearless. Then the moment Tyson stood, then the backward step, then the second backward step, then the awful stillness afterward, while everyone present silently agreed the challenge had inverted and eaten its owner. A fighter near the back said, "That's it," almost to himself. An old trainer answered, "Yeah." No one needed more words than that. The host of the evening eventually came back to the microphone with a smile that looked stapled onto his face and tried to push the event onward. He announced the next segment with too much energy, as if tone alone could rebuild momentum. But the room never fully returned to its previous shape. Once a genuine power shift happens in front of combat people, you can feel it for hours. Everything afterward carries the echo. The challenger tried to reassemble himself enough to keep participating in the event, but he no longer had control of his own myth. Men around him were polite now, which is often worse than mockery. Nobody openly laughed in his face. Nobody insulted him. They didn't need to. His punishment was already complete. They had seen him invite something he did not understand and then retreat from it one visible inch at a time. Tyson did not stay much longer. He didn't need to. That's what made the ending powerful. He had not won a fight. He had not delivered a speech. He had not played to the room. He simply revealed for one cold minute what the room had forgotten in its appetite for spectacle. Some men are not there to entertain your ego. By the time he left the venue, the story had already started changing shape in other men's mouths. Some would tell it as if Tyson had nearly climbed onto the platform. Others would swear the challenger went pale. A few would exaggerate Tyson's words because people always add noise where silence did the real work. But every version would keep the same central truth. A man told Mike Tyson in front of witnesses, "Stand in front of me for 30 seconds. Tyson's response shocked everyone, not because it was loud or clever, because it was real. That is what shattered the challenger, not aggression, not drama, reality. The sudden, terrifying collapse of the distance between a legend and a living man. He had wanted Tyson as symbol, Tyson as story, Tyson as material for his own performance. Instead, he got Tyson as presence. And presence in the hands of men like Tyson is sometimes more destructive than violence. That became the lesson people carried home. There are fighters who love an audience. There are men who know how to make a crowd rise, laugh, shout, and worship. There are challengers who build themselves through sound. And then there are men who can end sound completely by standing up. Tyson was that second kind. The challenger spent the next hour inside his own education. Tyson spent the same hour being Tyson, moving through the rest of the night with that same compact unreadability, as if the whole incident had only confirmed something he had known long before the microphone was ever lifted. And maybe that was the coldest part of all. For the challenger, it became a memory that would follow him forever. For Tyson, it was just another night where a man confused noise for power and learned too late what power actually looks like when it decides to answer.